Heading toward Liverpool, the reliable and beautiful ship cut through the freezing waters and thick fog on the northern Atlantic. Eerily, just a year earlier, a four-funneled liner had met her end due to an iceberg on her maiden voyage, and as Teutonic neared this location, suddenly a massive iceberg loomed into view. Instantly, the hearts of the crew leapt into their throats, and they took evasive maneuvers, holding their breath as the tower of ice came closer and closer. Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for a younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. I cannot believe we haven't gotten to RMS Teutonic yet, being that she's one of my absolute favorite ships. We will change that today. Before we get into RMS Teutonic, we need to look at the time period she was conceived in. During this time, the fierce competition for the blue ribbon for the fastest transatlantic crossing was heating up and reaching a fever pitch, with several shipping companies requesting the fastest ships they could get from their builders. White Star Line was one of these shipping companies desperate for the award, ordering two new ocean liners from their builders Harland and Wolff with the stipulation that they could average an Atlantic crossing speed of 20 knots. Also during this time, the British Admiralty squirmed in their chairs as they noted multiple armed merchant cruisers being built by Russia, leaving them in the dust militarily. Thus, Teutonic and Majestic, her sister, would be built under the British Auxiliary Armed Cruiser Agreement, and Teutonic would become the first ship built for Great Britain for easy conversion into an armed merchant cruiser. Before we get too carried away, let's stop and look at her building and specs. Construction on Teutonic and Majestic began in 1887, Teutonic being built as yard number 208. She was a Teutonic-class ocean liner, with her tonnages sitting at 9,984 gross registered tons and 4,269 net registered tons. She was 582 feet long and had a registered beam of 57.7 feet wide. She was the first White Star Line ship built without square-rigged sails, instead fully relying on her propulsion system. Speaking of which, she was equipped with two triple expansion engines turning 2 screws, and she was the first twin-screw vessel for White Star Line. This setup may seem so normal to us, but it really was game-changing at the time, and she averaged 20 to 23 knots. Teutonic was painted black with a red keel, white superstructure, and 2 buff and black smokestacks. She was also revolutionary when it came to passenger accommodations. All of White Star Line's previous liners only offered the cabin and steerage classes, the equivalent of first and third class. However, Teutonic and Majestic were the first White Star liners to take advantage of an emerging middle class. They offered accommodations for 300 saloon or first class in spacious cabins on her uppermost 3 decks, and many of these cabins were interconnected for family travel. Second or cabin class was meant for middle-class patrons, and there was room for 190 second-class passengers in comfortable rooms on the second highest deck, further aft toward the stern. Third, or steerage class, was primarily for poorer immigrants, and Teutonic could carry 1,000 in 2 areas of accommodation aboard the ship. As with all White Star Line ships, the third-class spaces were segregated, with single men berthed forward, families in the stern, and single women and children in the middle. This was customary to avoid inappropriate, unwanted interactions between single men and women. Her layout was similar to that of the original Britannic and her sister ship Germanic, in that steerage were housed in 9 separate compartments on the 2 lowest decks, with 5 forward and 4 aft. All 5 of the forward sections and 3 of the 4 aft sections were large, 20-berth cabins that lined the ship's hull. These cabins were like dormitories with open bunks. The interior spaces were left open for dining and other purposes. The 4th section in the stern was meant for married couples and families with children, and it had small but comfortable and private 2- and 4-berth cabins. She was the best mix of new and familiar, and we intend to give you a one-of-a-kind ship experience. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let me know down in the comments section below. Okay friends, let's look at her career. The revolutionary liner was launched on January 19, 1889, and christened Teutonic after the Teutons, an ancient northern European tribe that lived in Jutland and fought the Romans in France in the 2nd century BC. This ship was completed on July 25, 1889, following successful sea trials, participating in the Spithead Naval Review on August 5th and 6th, sporting 4.7-inch guns that would be added and removed only for military reviews. This was also in conjunction with the state visit of Kaiser Wilhelm II, the last German emperor and king of Prussia from 1888 until 1918. Don't tell him he was the last, he doesn't know that yet. The naval reviews at Spithead were events where ships from the Royal Navy were paraded and reviewed by an incumbent head of state. You might be saying, but Eleanor, Teutonic is a passenger ship. And right you are, my friend. But under the British Auxiliary Armed Cruiser Agreement, she had to be built in such a way that her deck was strong enough to carry guns without reconstruction and designed in such a fashion that she could serve well as a cruiser. Minimum speed requirements would come later, but the ships were required to be fast. Despite the fact that Kaiser Wilhelm II's great-aunt, Queen Victoria, remained aboard the royal yacht to observe the naval review, he was given a 2-hour tour of RMS Teutonic, so new and shiny. To quote James Cameron's Titanic film, the sheets hadn't even been slept in yet. This tour was hosted by his cousin, the Prince of Wales, future Edward VII. This man is strange. We won't even talk about his special love chair, and for those that know, you know. But he did give a convincing tour to Wilhelm II, who, during the tour, turned to a subaltern and said, "We must have some of these," while gesturing to Teutonic. His reaction is generally credited as the impetus for the creation of Germany's 4-funneled liners known as the Kaiser class, the first of which being the beautiful SS Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse. 8 years after her first Spithead Naval Review, she'd return in 1897 in honor of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. During the first 18 years of service, both Teutonic and Majestic, alongside their aging cousins Britannic and Germanic, would sail from Liverpool to New York City. Each ship averaged 1 round trip a month and averaging 11 to 14 sailings each season. White Star Line had planned it so they could operate a weekly service across the Atlantic with these 4 ships. Each week, on usually Wednesday or Thursday, one of these 4 set off from Liverpool. Then they'd head to Queenstown, Ireland to pick up more passengers before heading to New York City. Records have shown that Teutonic and her 3 amigas picked up as many as 800 Irish immigrants in a single stop, as the White Star Line was supremely popular in Ireland, being most of their ships were Irish-built. Harland and Wolff is an Irish shipyard in Belfast, and they had an exclusive contract with White Star Line. After Queenstown, Teutonic would then push out into the North Atlantic, taking on 2,500 miles of open sea between Ireland and New York. Once passengers disembarked at either the White Star Line Pier in New York City or the Immigration Center at Castle Garden and later on at Ellis Island, the ship would be prepared for the return voyage. Over the course of their careers, both Teutonic and Majestic were extremely profitable ships, and the 2 ships made crossings at full capacity numerous times. Now that we have that information, we can look at her maiden voyage. On August 7, 1889, Teutonic left Liverpool, England on her maiden voyage to New York City, New York in the United States. She would replace the 1871 SS Baltic in White Star Line's lineup, and Baltic was moved to a different route. Transatlantic races between Teutonic and the Inman Line's City of New York were very common in the 19th century, and they typically began in Queenstown Harbor or New York Harbor. On August 14, 1890, the Teutonic beat the City of New York by over 3 hours, and broke the ocean record coming from Queenstown in 5 days, 19 hours, and 5 minutes, breaking the record by 13 minutes. In 1891, Majestic won the Blue Ribbon for White Star Line, and later that year, Teutonic took it from her sister, averaging a crossing speed of 20.25 knots. Later, she bested her own record with a speed of 20.5 knots. The following year in 1892, City of Paris would take the Blue Ribbon, and no other White Star Line ship would hold it, as White Star Line would shift their focus from speed to luxury. But don't worry, we'll never shift our focus from our love of ships. This episode couldn't be possible without our amazing YouTube members and patrons. Thank you all so much. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Okay, it's time to look at the rest of her career. In 1897, Teutonic would take part in the Spithead Naval Review in honor of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, like I mentioned earlier. The next year, in 1898, she had a minor collision in New York Harbor with the United States Line's Berlin, though neither ship suffered major damage. she'd be repaired and continue on like normal. The Second Boer War broke out in 1899 and would end in 1902, and Teutonic and her sister would participate. This war was a conflict fought between the British Empire and the two Boer republics, the South African Republic and the Orange Free State, over the empire's influence in southern Africa. In the end, the British Empire would win, ending in the Treaty of Vereeniging on May 31st, 1902. In 1895, Captain Edward J. Smith, the famous captain who would perish in the sinking of RMS Titanic, would become captain of RMS Majestic, and he would serve as her captain as she entered the Second Boer War as well. The two sisters would participate in the Second Boer War in some capacity, more than likely as armed merchant cruisers and troop ships. Most of the fighting was inland, so I can't imagine much fighting was done by Teutonic and Majestic. They more than likely transported troops from Great Britain down to southern Africa, judging from the two trips made down to southern Africa in December of 1899 and February of 1900 for Majestic. I do know that the first group of Boer POWs captured at the Battle of Elan Select on October 21, 1899 were held on troop ships in Simon's Bay until POW camps in Cape Town and Simonstown were completed, though I can't verify if Majestic or Teutonic participated in these. Other than that, not much can be found of either ship's participation in the Second Boer War. From 1902 to 1903, both sisters would be refitted to return to passenger service for the White Star Line. In 1907, Teutonic, Majestic, Oceanic, and the new Adriatic were transferred to White Star Line's new express service between Southampton and New York via Cherbourg and Queenstown. In 1911, Teutonic was replaced on the lineup by the brand new four-funneled liner Olympic, and so Teutonic was then transferred to White Star Line's sister company Dominion Line for Canadian service. By the end of her career for White Star Line, she'd carried a total of 209,446 passengers westbound and another 125,720 eastbound for a grand total of 335,186 passengers carried by Teutonic. By 1913, Teutonic was considered old and no longer caught the eye of the top-class passengers, so then she was refitted to carry only second and third-class passengers. On October 27, 1913, the ship just barely avoided the same fate as Titanic when she ran so close to an iceberg that she only missed it by reversing her engines and putting the helm hard to port. She was just 172 miles east of Belle Isle off the Newfoundland coast when this occurred, within 300 miles of Titanic's final resting place. The fog was so thick that the iceberg was difficult to see, even when they were almost on top of it. A cable to the Chicago Tribune about the incident reads as follows. Liverpool, October 27th. The White Star liner Teutonic, which arrived here today from Montreal, had a narrow escape from meeting the same fate as the Titanic when it ran so close to an iceberg 172 miles east of Belle Isle, off Newfoundland coast, that it was prevented from crashing into it only by reversing its engines and putting the helm hard aport. The liner passed within 20 feet of the iceberg. The fog was so thick that even at that small distance, the berg could scarcely be distinguished. It was so close that there was danger that the propeller of the ship would strike it as the vessel went around. The passengers were not aware of their peril until it had been averted. They signed a testimonial to the captain and his officers, expressing their gratitude and admiration for the care and skill displayed by them. After this peril would come World War I. World War I began on July 28, 1914, following the rise of Germany and the decline of the Ottoman Empire, increased economic competition between nations, and the straw that broke the camel's back, the assassination of Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand. With the start of the Great War, Teutonic became an armed merchant cruiser once more, and she was commissioned to the 10th Cruiser Squadron. The squadron, created in July 1913 and allocated to the 3rd Fleet, was reassigned to the Grand Fleet at the beginning of World War I, and then made Cruiser Force B in August of 1914, but is most famously known as the Northern Patrol. It remained part of the Grand Fleet until December 19. The squadron was disbanded from January 1918 to 1937. In 1916, Teutonic was refitted with 6-inch guns, then serving as a convoy escort ship as well as a troop transport ship. World War I ended on the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour in 1918, so November 11th, 1918 at 11 a.m. GMT, with the signing of the armistice. This day was called Armistice Day for many years until it became known as Veterans Day in 1954, and that's what we celebrate nowadays. But it's interesting to know that the day stemmed from the end of World War I, a war largely forgotten and overshadowed by the hideous nature of World War II. RMS Teutonic returned to the Dominion line after the war, being repaired and refitted. She served for them dutifully and without incident until 1921, when the ship, now 32 years old and falling behind technologically, was retired and sent to the scrapyard, being scrapped at Emden in Lower Saxony, Germany, sometime in 1921. And that marked the end of Teutonic's story. RMS Teutonic was a revolutionary ship that changed the game for shipping, inspiring countless beautiful liners in her stead. She served dutifully in 2 major conflicts, acting as Britain's first armed merchant cruiser. Teutonic was a highly successful ship during her life cycle, both in times of peace and in times of war. As long as we continue to share her story, she will continue to live on forever. If you liked that story and wanted to hear something similar, check out our White Star Line ships playlist in the cards. Tune in next week for the story of Zuikaku, an Imperial Japanese Navy aircraft carrier that participated in Pearl Harbor before meeting her own horrific end. Thank you for tuning into Shipwreck Sunday, have a great week, and we'll see you next time.